important important group. Okay, the first on the first question, how did what was it, Mark? How did it start? How did the Metro Manila start?
Yeah, so I know there's a lot of how the various municipalities or cities, the boundaries change for differently, and so I'm curious to know how was it like how from your position when you were the Metro Manila Commissioner, how did it shape up? What was the
well,
yeah.
It sort of like happened before the formal creation of the Metro Manila Commission. There was what was known, similar to what we have, what we hear, or what is known in the United States as a Metropolitan Statistical Area, or MSA. We had in the Philippines the Greater Manila Area, or GMA, which referred actually to about 16 local jurisdictions, the 4 cities of Manila, Pasay, Quezon City, and Caloocan, and the municipalities actually that were all part of the Rizal province, Makati, Mandaluyong, San Juan, etc. Okay. Now, in the 1960s, we already in Metro Manila started to experience severe urban problems, congestion, a lot of slums, a lot of homeless people. Pollution was already a major problem. Water pollution, air pollution, traffic congestion was already a problem. Uncollected garbage was especially a major problem. And the diminishing amount of areas for proper disposal of garbage. And so what was happening was there were a lot of these problems. Oh, by the way, criminality was also becoming a major concern.
Sir, if I may speak in, so I think these are very critical problems, and I'm curious to know, based on these problems, what were the identified programs and projects back then that were talked about, and what were
there was a number of there were a number of studies sometime in the mid-60s by different groups of what these problems are. And so flooding was one of those frequently mentioned. Slums and informal settlers was another one that was frequently mentioned. The garbage problem, uncollected garbage, the diminishing amount of land for proper disposal of garbage. Wastewater was also a problem, but it wasn't given that much attention.
If I may, you mentioned about flooding. Sorry to keep cutting on you, so just like to let the conversation. You mentioned about flooding. I heard about the project Parañaque Spillway, and based on the Metro plan that was crafted, I don't know if it was part of the main projects that was supposed to have been implemented.
Well, the Parañaque Spillway was a recommendation in the 1977 Metro Plan. However, it was not considered a top priority because of its very large expense and difficulty of implementation, because it was going to cut across a highly populated area, which meant having to displace a lot of people. And so when my office was one of those that did an evaluation of all of the proposed projects, that was part of my responsibility. It was ranked not top priority.
Sir, the
Okay.
reason I also ask is because we see now if it's a metropolitan area, it would also be ideal that there's maybe an anchor project that can cut across different cities and municipalities where they can maybe converge and sort of a sectoral approach that this project can help piece together the different cities and municipalities and working together in setting up the. Is there such a project other than the Parañaque Spillway?
Well, the flood control master plan actually had a lot of components. The Parañaque spillway was only one of its elements or components. There is the Mangahan floodway, which was implemented. There are the pumping stations that were implemented. Originally, there were 7, but they were expanded later on. Additional pumping stations were done. A lot of improvements in the, for example, if for those of you who are familiar with Pasig River, the revetment along the Pasig River, that was part of the plan because before the revetment on the Pasig River was very low, and so it quickly overspilled every time there was heavy rains. So that was raised. And then the Napindan hydraulic control structure was also part of the flood control master plan, which prevents the backflow of the Manila Bay inside Metro Manila and also into Laguna de Valle. So these were different elements of a much larger master plan.
So when these projects or when these were being crafted and being implemented, how was the conversation with the different mayors who as you know, the cities that it will pass through, as you mentioned, the Pasig River, which is a river that cuts across a lot of cities?
Yes. Okay. Well, it was explained to the mayors that a flood control master plan consists of different elements, different components. You have the primary lines, drainage lines. You have the secondary, and you have the third. It's similar to a hierarchy of roads or hierarchy of streets, but in this case, it's drainage. And so we were saying that at the macro level, the tertiary level, that will be taken care of by the national government. The secondary is also going to be taken care of by the national government. But the primary, these are the smaller lines, have to be taken care of by the LGUs, by the individual LGUs. So there was some kind of synchronization that was implemented. And it was something that was orchestrated by what was then or what is now known as the DPWH.
Okay, sir, thank you. So maybe we can hold off for now. So I'd like now to open the floor to our participants. I have a question here from Pedro Ortiz about Pedro. Feel free to share your question. So his question is, hi Pedro,
Dinky, thank you so much for providing this this talk and this occasion to talk about Manila. I have one comment and one question. The comment is based on a chat comment by Professor Contin. No? She says the problems you have been describing are problems created by the new metropolitan scale. It was not anymore the urban scale, the growth of Manila were creating those problems. No? So really it was a problem of managing the new size that was not yet in place any institution that would be able to manage the metropolitan size. My question is about that past. For you, Dinky, what is the best and the worst of that past experience, of that history of Manila metropolitan?
Thank you, Pedro.
Well, maybe one significant lesson was before the creation of the Metropolitan Manila Commission, there was an attempt by the 16 mayors that comprised the Greater Manila area to form a collegial body, and they did this voluntarily. Okay, of course, they were prompted by a prominent newspaper publisher at that time. This was in around 1967, 1968. And so the mayor of Manila then, Mayor Ramon Bagatsing, convened the 16 mayors, and they decided and agreed to organize themselves into the Metro Manila Mayors Coordinating Council. Completely voluntary. It did not work. It only lasted for a little over 2 years. The problem was that being voluntary, there was a hesitation on the part of some of the local authorities to contribute the supposedly agreed upon amount of money to maintain the operations of the Metropolitan Coordinating Council. They identified the priorities. Flooding was one of them. The squatting and the informal settlers, the slums was another one. Crime was another one. So there were about 5 or 6 priority concerns that the mayors themselves identified. And they even had created teams to address each one. And the problem was when the plans were needed to be fleshed out. Funding was important. And the contribution, being voluntary, was not enough until some of the local authorities started or stopped attending the meetings, stopped communicating, and the whole thing just deteriorated and fell apart. So I think that was the worst lesson that was learned from that event or from that initiative. But that led to the creation, that was one of the things that led to the creation of the Metropolitan Manila Commission as a mandated body formally organized by government. The commission structure or type of structure was adopted. There were several other structures that were adopted, but what was decided on was that the commission type was going to be the one that was adopted. And so that was what was done. And then another municipality, that of Valenzuela, which is the only municipality which is not part of Rizal, was added, and that's why there are 17 that comprise the Metro Manila area. I think I'll stop there so that there might be some other questions.
Yes, thank you, Sir Dinky. Those are very interesting insights. So I have a question here from Ms. Antonella. Are you there? Kindly share your question. Professor Contin. Hi, good evening.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for that opportunity to know Professor Dinky. My question is about from the side of the university. So which kind of new competencies we have to give to our students so that we can deal with new tools that are mandatory for a politician to take decision regarding the natural hazard. Usually among the map that and the tools that we have to manage a city, we don't have some tools to understand the reason of the natural hazard challenges. So do you think that the tools that a politician or a civil servant right now have to manage to face this problem is enough, or there are some other tools, and in particular, which kind of integration among cause and effect has professional we have to, and university, we have to provide to civil servant and decision maker to face this problem?
Okay, well, thank you for that question. That's a kind of a difficult thing to answer from in the context of the Philippines, because especially in the context of metropolitan governance in the Philippines, because urban management or metropolitan management is a very kind of new, not so popular topic in the Philippines. Urban planning has been promoted in the Philippines for many years now, but it was only just just last year, in fact, that it became necessary for people working in the government doing planning work to get a license as an urban planner. Only last year. So it's a very kind of a new, relatively new profession. Now, the problem is that there are not too many people who have gone to planning schools, because we only have a few schools in the Philippines that teach urban planning. Okay, and the concentration of the teaching of urban planning is planning, not management. Management is in another department of the university. That's the College of Public Administration. Okay, so there is this disconnect between planning and management. Then there is also dealing with problems of environment. That's another department. So the academic structure is very similar to the way that the government is structured. It's segmented, it is sectoral, and therefore the coordination is very difficult. It is very, very difficult because the heads of these agencies consider themselves as co-equal. So they don't like being told by somebody else to do this and do that. Okay, that was a problem that I encountered before dealing with because I was representing the metropolitan government, but Metro Manila is the base of all the national government agencies who do projects in Metro Manila. For example, the flood control. A flood control program was a Department of Public Works project. So they don't want to be dictated by a local government what to do. They see themselves as higher in the hierarchy. So they said, well, this is what we want to do. And we tell them, well, your flood control is not going to work if it's not connected to the primary lines of the individual cities. It will, your big infrastructure components of the system is not going to work if they're not all interconnected. So, again, as I mentioned, the context is different, I think, in other countries where planning may have been already long established. But in the Philippines, it's only recent. And it's only, in fact, not very many mayors are data-driven. They still, a lot of decision makers, a lot of the mayors decide on the basis of gut feel. They feel this is a problem, or their constituents tell them this is a problem, and there is this pressure on them to come up with immediate solutions, and they address that. The problem is that the mayors don't think of, or because of the pressure exerted on them, they don't look into what might be more serious complications by this quick solution that they think of. They may be aggravating the problem. So I'm not sure what the discipline is, the academic discipline is necessary to address that kind of a gap in the decision-making process.
Sir Dinky, thank you for actually we're now segging towards the second part, looking into the future, because we're already talking about the academe, the future planners. So before I take in some questions, so I'd like to establish that. And as you mentioned, Sir Dinky, there are three major challenges that seem to be emerging. So you have data, you have the silo planning of governments, and also the training and management of future planners. So based from all of these aspects, what advice can you give to emerging metropolitan areas, based also from now looking positive, more of thinking positive and being optimistic? What lessons can you share? We have guests here from Cebu and other metropolises in other countries.
Okay, well, I think people from the other parts of the Philippines where they're already experiencing a metropolitanization of their area should know that the Metro Manila Commission, which is now known as MMDA, was originally created during martial law. Okay, that in itself became a disadvantage. A disadvantage in the sense that because it is associated with Marcos, it was seen as something bad, in spite of the fact that it was supposed to do good from a technical point of view. Politically, it was viewed as something bad. Okay. However, if you look back, it probably would not have been possible to create a metropolitan body had it not been martial law, because of the kind of politics that we have in the Philippines, especially in Metro Manila, where all the mayors are possible candidates to become president. So how can you have 17 mayors agreeing on a unified plan unless you have somebody who is able to control them? And that was Mrs. Marcos, who was the appointed governor of Metro Manila. And she performed that function. She was my boss, in effect. She performed that function all the way up to the end when they had to leave the country, when they were forced out of office. But I think this is important for the people in Cebu, in Davao, in Iloilo, in Cagayan de Oro, and in other metropolitan areas to recognize that that was a limitation. Now, let me jump to the situation now in other areas. I know of what has been attempted in Cebu. Now, how can you organize a metropolitan Cebu government or entity if the mayor of Cebu himself is not interested to participate? Similar case in Metro Bacolod. How can you create a Metro Bacolod authority when the mayor of Bacolod itself does not want to cooperate with the surrounding mayors? So we have this problem of this local politics that gets into the way of decision making. And so it becomes very difficult for a technical person like myself who gets to, who appreciates what the problem is from a broader perspective, the interconnection of things, but cannot really move forward because of the lack of cohesion in the way that decisions are made among the several LGUs that comprise a metropolitan body. So
Okay.
I'd like to stop there.
Yes, that's very, very interesting, sir. No, that's an
Yes,
interesting
Mark,
insight. No, martial law being something connected to the
Yeah.
formation. So, yeah, can we open
maybe we can hear from Mark. Kanina pa nagtaas
yes.
Sir Maxwell Espina is raising his hand, and then followed by Sir Rodrigo.
Okay.
Yeah. Good evening, Dinky.
Hi, you me.
Yeah, I was thinking why isn't NEDA the planning body and the most appropriate body to be able to manage or plan for metropolises? It has the sufficient perspective to be able to integrate several LGUs, and it is insulated enough from the intramurals of local politics. Besides that, the NEDA board itself is composed of the secretaries of all the departments in government. So it's a matter of only bringing down from the regional planning bodies to a metropolitan area. Maybe that would have been the best, instead of coming up with a new law on creating an authority, which is not. I think the Manila model is a very poor example of a.
Yes, yes. Well, I completely agree with you, because really the NEDA structure, the Regional Development Council structure, is in a sense like a metropolitan body.
Yeah.
It's multi-jurisdictional, okay? And you have a balance between the political, which is the chairman, one of the governors, and then the NEDA regional director for the technical. So I think that model can be brought down, as you say,
Correct.
to the
Yeah.
level of the metro area. So I think that's a promising option.
Thank you.
Let's call on Pedro. You raise your hand.
Well, in previous point, the discipline we have to create is to be called plan management. And that discipline should be in a different faculty, neither the administration of management nor the planning of urbanism. No, probably the faculty of collective intelligence. That was my
Yes.
point.
Yes. Well, one of the things that I had learned is that in metropolitan planning, what was important was to have a structure plan, not a detailed land use plan, but rather a structure plan, a kind of a framework, a kind of a general framework, and then to let the individual jurisdictions kind of fill up the blanks. We tried to do this, and then what we did was we only looked at the individual plans of the individual jurisdictions, the boundaries, and to see that to check on and make sure that there is no conflicting land use, because many of the political boundaries you only see on the map. You don't see it on the roads or on the ground, and so you have situations where you have a factory because the area is zoned by one jurisdiction as industrial, and then right next to it is a neighborhood health clinic because the adjacent local jurisdiction zoned it as institutional and allows health clinics. So we tried to make sure that did not happen. And so what we came up was just a structure plan. But the structure plan was based on an environmental assessment, an ecosystem assessment, which at that time was not yet very popular. People were asking us, why are you doing that? Is that important? And we said, well, we want to find out exactly where it is safe for urban development to take place. Because at that time, we already identified the Marikina Valley as a flood-prone area. And therefore, the flood control program should address that before roads were to be constructed. Because we know in the Philippines, once roads are constructed, the real estate developers are not far behind. And then they start filling up all of these low-lying areas and start putting up subdivisions. And before you know it, it's too difficult to implement a flood control system when it's all built up. So we did that regional environmental assessment study in the beginning, we had the advantage of access to a World Bank loan. And so we hired a couple, in fact, a husband and wife team from the United States to do the environmental assessment. And we use that as the basis for the regional structure plan.
Mertz, any other questions from our participants?
Well, so far.
Okay, if not, so we'll
na-
proceed. So I think
Yeah.
we're segging towards the third portion. No, Sir Dinky shared a bit about his actual experience on, in particular, that structure plan and putting things together. So I'd like to now go towards the discussion more of the how was it like dealing with all of course, from the top level. You mentioned earlier Imelda Marcos as your boss, and then you have the mayors to talk to. So what was it like, Sir Dinky, back then? I would imagine you're very young back then.
Right, right. Yes. Well, some of my more senior friends at that time were asking me how come I was lasting that long in my position. I said, well, I'm lasting that long because I have a high frustration tolerance level. If you easily get frustrated, I don't think you're going to last very long in government. And so I was trying to do what I could. I knew what the difficulties were, and I also learned a few tricks from having worked early in life, because I started working when I was second year in college. And one of the things that I did was I would do door-to-door selling. And when you do door-to-door selling, you have to, be very charming, especially when you go to a house and the person who opens the door is the wife, and you try to sell her something. You have to be convincing. And I knew from that experience that you never go to a mayor to tell the mayor, Mayor, I recommend that you do this. Okay? You never do that. What you have to do is you go to the mayor and tell the mayor, Mayor, which ones of these plans would you like to implement? So you kind of widen or broaden the chances of the mayor choosing something that he likes, rather than presenting him with a question that is answerable by a yes or a no, because that means you only have a 50% chance of approval. But when you ask him, which of these plans would you like, it increases your chances of approval, right? And I was also using the experience from my college days of being a member of the baseball team. Some of you may be familiar with baseball. There is such a thing as a batting average, okay? If you are at bat, if you have the chance to bat 10 times and you're able to hit the ball 3 times, you have a 0.300 batting average, okay? Now, what I set for myself when I was with the Metro Manila Commission was that I aimed for a 60% batting average. So I knew that when I go to Mrs. Marcos or to a mayor or to any of these secretaries of the different departments, and if I have 10 recommendations, I have to have several recommendations, okay, several options. And if I get 6 of them, that's ideal. That's ideal, okay? If I get more, that's even better, of course, okay? But I was satisfied with 6. And I thought that was already good. Now, how do you increase the chances of getting 6? You add a few bad eggs to the 10, so that those are the obvious ones that the mayor or Mrs. Marcos will not accept, okay? So the good ones are the ones that you really put forward. And so your chances of increasing the batting average is much better. that was how I did it.
Very interesting. So it's really useful how to convince, no? So when you were convincing the mayors and Imelda Marcos, so at the back of your mind, what was your main goal or aspirations? Basically, what was your pet project? You mentioned, sir, a lot of bad projects you inserted, so you increased the batting average. But what was your pet project back then?
Well, one of the things I learned was I should not have just a pet project. I had several pet projects. In fact, I had a drawer of potential projects because, you know, it's human nature to always be looking for something new. You will notice in consumer products, you know, like toothpaste or washing detergent. They come up with this product that says new, stronger, more effective, etc., etc. Actually, it's the same thing. It's just that it's packaged differently. Probably they added some new ingredients, but it's basically the same thing. Okay, so given that that is something that most people kind of look for, you need to come up with something new all the time to excite them to accept what you are recommending. Now, if you just keep on going back and recommending the same thing over and over and over again, you know, and you keep on saying, well, you know, we have to update our CLUP, you know, and the mayor says, I heard that last year. So what else is new? Okay, so a CLUP is a CLUP. So, okay, you update it a little bit. What is so exciting about that? It doesn't excite the mayor to do a project, which is what he wants to do. So you need to think of what could make it more interesting for them to accept what you are proposing. And that, I think, is very important, because otherwise it can get very frustrating when you keep on being denied or disapproved for whatever it is that you are trying to propose.
Thank you, Sir Dinky. That's very interesting. Berts, any questions?
Actually,
Before-
Miss Antonella just commented that Sir Dinky now is an essence of a metro seductor with his idea on how to deal the politicos during his time.
Well, let me share one experience that I had, which was kind of, I thought it worked, but then it did not. Okay, one of the things we were trying to push at that time among the mayors was data-driven decision making, which is now very popular, which is now becoming more and more popular. Okay, with all of these gadgets that we now have, with cell phones, with, you know, laptops and tablets, etc. You know, data is now becoming easily accessible, and because of our frequent typhoons and disasters, the mayors also have started to appreciate digital technology, and so slowly we now have the opening to introduce better data management systems, data information management systems. Okay. Now, one time when we were trying to promote this among the 17 jurisdictions of Metro Manila, the mayors couldn't quite appreciate the importance of a data bank. So there was a fire that happened in one of the slums, in one of the biggest slums in downtown Manila. And because we had radio communications, I heard about the fire, and I heard that the mayor of Manila was going to go there to check on what happened. So when I heard this, I immediately got my staff to pull out of our filing cabinet the data about that slum that burned down, because my office was in charge of assessing all of the slums in Metro Manila before. So we had this complete set of data about the different slums, where they were located, and some kind of a summary socio-eco profile of each one. Okay, so I said, pull out the that particular data sheet about that slum, and then I had a photocopy made, and then I jumped into my car and I went to the site of the file, and I was monitoring on the radio that I was going to arrive ahead of the mayor. Okay, so I got there ahead, a few minutes ahead, and then the mayor got arrived and got out of his car. I met him, and immediately I told the mayor, Mayor, there are reporters here, and they will be asking you details. Here is the data about the slum. And he looked at it and said, oh, really? We have that many people here, and so many are children, and do we have a school here? Yes. I mean, this is the complete socio-eco profile of this place. So when the mayor, of course, you know how it is. When the mayor goes to a fire, all of the reporters flock to him, and we're asking him, Mayor, what are your plans, etc., etc. And the mayor looks at the sheet and recites all the statistics. You know, the reporters were amazed at how informed the mayor was, not knowing that he just got this a few minutes before. And so after everything was done and he was going to go back to his office, I walked with him, and before he rode this car, I told him, Mayor, this is an example of the data bank that I was briefing all the mayors about. I'd like to follow it up, and so may I see you at your office tomorrow? And said, sure, okay. You know, he was in a good mood. He was he had a lot of poggy points from that experience. So the following day, I went to see him, and he said, okay, let me call. So he called his different department heads and said, okay, Commissioner Einsiedel is going to, tell us something. So I explained what this is, etc. And then he said, okay, we'll set up something. And that was done. So I sent my staff to follow up. Nothing happened. We followed up several times. Nothing happened. Nothing happened in spite of all of the efforts we tried in trying to convince them to set it up. And when the mayor of Manila does not take the lead during those times, all the others will not follow. So we failed. We were not able to convince them to establish a proper database. And I'm sure many of those of you who are connected with local governments know this for a fact, that there is hardly a local government that has an updated data bank. And the only time LGUs will update it is when there is a foreign funded project that requires it. But otherwise, it's not regularly updated. But as I said, now with digital technology, there is now, I think, the opportunity of promoting data-driven urban management.
Thank you, sir.
Management.
Thank you, Sir Dinky. Very, very interesting story, and I'm
Very
sure a lot can
informative.
relate. Very informative.
Historical account. Yeah. Well, Mark, just to follow through with Sir Dinky's reality bites experience, I would like to pose this question about what's his realization with how the management of the metros here in Manila became, because I'm sure there's more realization on how.
Actually, Mertz, that leads me to our final question.
Yes,
No?
yes,
No. Thank you for reminding me about that. So, sir, I'd like to synthesize everything. This question doesn't mean to keep going back to the past and have a wishful thinking, but really sort of a reflection for all of us. Maybe what would you have done differently? Looking back now that you mentioned about data, I can just imagine what the value of that. But knowing that tipping point where the mayor and everything all else collapsed, it was not successful, what would have been done differently now that you realize it?
Well, one of the challenges of metropolitan management or metropolitan planning and management is that it is a moving target. Okay, it's a moving target. And so, that particular question, what would I have done differently? I find that difficult to answer because the conditions change very quickly. Okay, what has happened now that it is the MMDA? Okay, is that the mayors, at least some of the mayors, who are friends with each other, are somehow able to agree on what it may not be entirely metropolitan wide, but it has the beginnings of something that can be metropolitan wide. Okay, for example, Rex Gatchalian of Valenzuela is a friend of Vico Soto of Pasig, and so is Joy Belmonte of Quezon City, and a few other mayors. Okay, so these mayors who are friends with each other, aside from their formal meetings, they text each other, they call each other, they talk to each other, and they confer with each other. And this has been happening, in fact, during this pandemic, on what to do with the tracing, contact tracing, what to do with the rollout of the vaccines, setting up the vaccination sites, etc., etc. They're comparing notes, okay? And so there is now this kind of an evolving realization among these few mayors that a data-driven system is very helpful. And they are able to prove it during this pandemic because, for contact tracing, when last year, when some of the LGUs started to initiate contact tracing and they started to have this QR code card, okay? The problem was that every place you go to requires you to register. So in other words, the system was not interoperable. But now it has become interoperable among LGUs, which is a vast improvement. So my QR card for Pasig, I can use in Valenzuela, I can use in Quezon City, I can use in Mandaluyong. Whereas last year, that was not possible. So I think there is now this movement. And because of digital technology, I think we need to capitalize on that. Because the mayors, many of the mayors also appreciate the use of digital technology for emergency response. That was actually the earlier start, even before COVID, the pandemic. So I think we need to capitalize on that and promote that more and make it I think related to some of the day-to-day routine tasks that LGUs perform. Because unless it becomes routine, it doesn't get institutionalized, and it does not get into the behavior of the bureaucracy that the LGUs are. So I think that's where the direction I would like to pursue further for the future.
Wow, thank you, Sir Dinky. Exact 1 minute left for our Metro X, and I think that's a good closing information and thought. No, if there are other questions or comments before we close our first Metro X and give our closing remarks to Pedro. So if there are no questions, Pedro, would you like to close the event?
Well, I am very honored to let me close the event, but I think it has been a great success because obviously the amount of information and sophisticated information in the mind of Dinky is a treasure. So we have been very fortunate to have been able to share with you, Dinky, all those experiences which are not written in books of planning, which are the outcome of years and years of dealing with politicians and not with planners, which are the people that at the end make the decisions. No? So my resolve from this hour is that if you want to sell a cylinder to a politician, you either ask him if he wants a circle or if he wants a square. And whatever he chooses, it will be the cylinder you want to sell. No? So thank you so much, Dinky. It has been great, and I hope we will be able to do more of this. Thank you, Mark, and congratulations for the way you have dealt with the Metro X. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, and see you
Thank you,
next month
everyone.
for our Metro X Cebu event. Thank you, Sir Dinky, for
Okay, you're welcome.
your time.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay, bye.
Bye.